make sure that you turn your video on. We will also be using the chat function for any technical support, so enter any questions or issues you have there. You're also welcome to use the chat to post and chat with other learners here as well. And do we have Rick with us so that we can get a group photo here?
I'm with you.
There you are.
Yeah.
There you are. Let's go ahead and get a group photo if we can. Before we do that, let's start by having everyone make sure that they introduce themselves in the chat. So please include what city, state you're joining from. So for example, I'm Lawrence from San Francisco, California. And then in order to prepare for taking a picture together, please go ahead and turn your screen to gallery view. And the way that you do this is you find the little view button at the top right of your screen, and you click on it and you select gallery view. So go ahead and do that right now. It's at the top right, and then we'll grab a quick picture. And Liz or Molly, if you could let us know once you've got the picture done, we'll continue.
Smile.
All right, everybody smile. We've got 2 pages here. So, one more second. And one more. All right.
Excellent. All good, Liz? Okay, now we recommend that you select speaker view. So go back up to the top little box that you just used, and now select speaker view at the top right of your screen. It'll allow you better viewing of the event. So you're now welcome to turn on your audio as we wait for a couple of minutes, and then we'll mute you right before we start. Thanks again, Rick. We'll get started here in just a couple of minutes.
No problem. Sounds great.
Really excited to have you.
Welcome to Get Set Up.
Let's
Hi.
see who's here
There are
in the
no
chat.
wrong answers, only good questions. I'm here to help you.
Welcome to GetSetUp. It's more than online classes. It's live learning for older adults. You're asking questions, engaging directly with your guide.
I think I made a mistake.
It's a safe place to explore, make mistakes, and have fun. All from the comfort of your home with hundreds of topics.
Lots of
to choose
questions
from.
in the chat.
And right now,
Great
classes
question.
are free. Just go to getsetup.org/free.
Yes, Lawrence, good questions.
Some good ones. All right, well, we are at the top of the hour. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome to Get Set Up special event on travel with Rick Steves. My name is Lawrence. I'm the co-founder of Get Set Up, and I'll be your host tonight. As a community of lifelong learners, Get Set Up is thrilled to have one of America's most popular and informed guides on European travel here to guide us tonight. But before we get started, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. For our front row, our live studio audience, you will have a chance to ask questions midway through the program. Until then, please remember to mute yourself. For those joining via our community live streams on Get Set Up TV, Facebook, and YouTube, you are welcome to enter your questions into the chat. We have a lot of content and questions to go through, but we'll do our very best to get to as many of them as possible. And now on to our special guest. Rick Steve hardly needs any introduction. I've been a fan for over 20 years, and I'm sure many of you have as well. And of course, I've planned many a vacation using the advice and recommendations of Rick. Rick is a popular public television host, a best-selling guidebook author, and an outspoken activist who encourages Americans and other travelers to broaden their perspectives through travel. He's the founder and owner of Rick Steves Europe, a travel business with a tour program that brings more than 30,000 people to Europe annually. Rick lives and works in his hometown of Edmonds, Washington, where his office overlooks his old junior high school. Welcome, Rick, and thank you for being with us today.
It's a delight to be with you and think about travel and how we're going to move forward from this pandemic time.
Wonderful. Well, we have so many questions. Why don't we move straight to those?
Great.
Obviously, 2020 was a very different kind of year for most of us because of the pandemic. How was your 2020 different?
Well, I was in the beginning of 2020, I had 100 of our tour guides from Europe in this living room right here. And that was about a week before the pandemic hit. And we were euphoric. We were coming off our best year ever. We took 30,000 Americans on 1,500 different tours in 2019. And my publisher had just visited from where you are, I think, San Francisco, and he showed us the sales list, and 25 of the top 30 guidebooks published in the United States for Europe had my name on the cover, and we were just rocking. And then all of a sudden, this tsunami of a pandemic just swept over us, like everybody just kind of put our whole lives on hold. So I've had 100 people on my payroll and zero revenue throughout ever since then. And it's just a challenge to keep the team together and to keep people patient and diligent and realizing that we're going to come out of this. And we're doing that. We're ready to go. But, my 2020 for me has been a real interesting time. I'm not, patience, is not an American forte. It's certainly not a Rick Steves forte, but patience has been my middle name for the last year. And I'm so comfortable with just being patient. It's God's way of telling us to slow down. There's more to life than increasing its speed. This is kind of sort of therapy for a workaholic like me. And I'm just taking a break. I don't regret my focus on European travel, but for the last year, I've been employing my traveler's mindset right here at home, trying new stuff, and it's been, I'm really we're most of us are privileged people who can dream about traveling, and I'm totally aware of that. But I've got a comfortable place to work. I can do my work at home. I'm healthy. I've got a beautiful environment. So I'm pretty thankful about that. And 2020 has not been bad. I just have not been on an airplane I haven't stepped on an airplane for more than a year now. And coming off of 30 profitable years to a very unprofitable year. But there's so much more to life during this pandemic than my bottom line and our travel dreams. And I've been focused in on things that really are more fundamental, being sure that our community is in good shape and getting to know the neighborhood and trying new passions and learning new things and appreciating the environment. There's so much to focus on that when we're at home, I think we can be positive about that. And I'm thankful for that.
Thank you, Rick. You mentioned patience, but other than patience, what have you learned about yourself during the pandemic?
I've learned about myself that while I'm passionate about travel, I was walking home the other day and I saw a snail on my neighbor's fence, and all I could think was escargot. Literally, that's just what I thought. I'd love to go to France and have a dozen escargot. But there is so much more to do. And, that's, I've got a girlfriend who's a great cook, and I've learned how to cook in the last year. I don't think I had ever worn an apron. I barely knew how to turn on my oven. And I've just enjoyed getting into something totally different from what I've ever done before. That's what this traveler's mindset is all about. What I've decided to do was not mope and complain or be anxious and spin my wheels, but just take a breath. And I thought, okay, I cannot travel, but I've got this traveler's mindset that I'm sort of a evangelical about being a good traveler. And what is that? It's having a positive attitude. It's wanting to get out of your comfort zone. It's being curious. It's being eager to make mistakes and learn from them. Try new things and to come home with the most beautiful souvenir, which is a broader perspective. And I thought, well, I'm going to employ that traveler's mindset right here. And I've done that in the last year. And I just spent a lot of money on a set of knives. My kids are saying, who is this man? I can't, 2 years ago, if you told me I was going to spend as much money as you can spend for a flight to Europe on a set of knives, I'd say you're crazy. But now I know how beautiful it is to have good knives. That's just a small example of, I'm actually cooking up hummingbird juice, this sugary water, and I'm feeding the hummingbirds and I'm getting to know the hummingbirds. I would have never done that before. I got to say, I never understood people who walked their dogs. I didn't think very, very positively about that. And I realized how wrong I was. Now we walk the dogs, and I can understand how people love their dogs. So this has been a beautiful opportunity for me to take a break. And I try to see things in terms of like Corona bonuses. And I'm going to come out of this. I'm going to just dive right back into travel as soon as it's safe to do so. But a Corona bonus for me is to realize that we can employ that traveler's mindset, that joy of trying new things, that curiosity, that eagerness to get out of our comfort zone, that willingness to celebrate diversity and not want everything to be like we have it, but realize different people find different truths to be self-evident and God-given, and they get turned on by different stuff. We can really sharpen our senses right here at home. And that's part of being a good travel writer, I think, is being a good observer and have that right, positive, curious attitude. And I'm doing it at home, and I'm really enjoying it. And in fact, I'm excited about traveling again, but a lot of people are just chomping at the bit to get out there. And I don't want to fly all the way to Amsterdam and eat in a bubble where I can't get somebody else's germs. For me, I'm going to go back to Europe when the time is right. I mean, I've got a staff of 100 people I'm keeping on our payroll in order to do that, but we're not going to be the first ones out of the gate. When social distancing and Rick Steves travel have very little to do with each other. And, when I go to Europe, when I go to Paris, I want to be kissed on the cheeks. When I go to Rome, I want to pack into those piazzas with the locals, buy a gelato and stroll to the Passeggiata up and down those pedestrian boulevards. In Rome, the Passeggiata is called the Struzio. It means the big rub. Everybody rubs against each other. You're out checking out your neighbors, When I go to a pub in Ireland, way on the west coast of Ireland, where they stand in the bluff and they gaze out at the Atlantic and they say, the next parish over is Boston. I want to step into that pub and clink glasses right there at the bar with people who really do believe that, strangers are just friends who've yet to meet. It's a sort of a philosophy that is so fundamentally people. It's not keeping away from people, but it's being close to people. And people is what distinguishes a good travel experience. If I'm making a TV show, if I'm leading a tour, writing a guidebook, taking a family vacation, the measure of that show is how many people do we meet in faraway lands? How much do we learn from the friends that we meet? And I just love that. And I'm going to do that when the time is right. And the time will be right. But in the meantime, I keep reminding my staff, let's not spin our wheels here. Let's just take a breath. The normalcy will return. I fully believe we're on a glide path to normalcy now. It's just a matter now of us being diligent and embracing the science and getting our vaccinations. But, we're going to get there, but we're not going to get there until we're all there. I mean, everybody's got to get on the boat before we take off. And then we will find ourselves back into what we dream of as travelers. Will it be the end of this year? Will it be early next year? Nobody really knows. We got to do it here, but they also got to do it where we want to fly. And in my case, that's Europe.
Well, I think it's great that it took a pandemic to get you to finally buy a set of decent knives and learn to cook.
Yes, no.
So during this time while we've all been at home, like what is one of the travel memories that you keep replaying? Like where does your mind go when it wanders?
I've got these journals that I wrote before I was a travel writer, when I was just a student, and they're hardback, 200-page, beautifully written, packed with tiny print journals for 6 or 7 years in a row. And I've actually had them scanned and transcribed this year, and I'm reading through them. And it's the first time I've read them in 40 years. And I've had this moment to do that. I didn't dream I'd have that moment in the form of a pandemic, but they're so filled with memories, and these memories are just treasures. And sometimes a memory is there, but it needs to be jolted to break out of the holder and become something that you're aware of. But I was hitchhiking in Ireland back when I was a student, and this wonderful family picked me up, and we just had the most amazing chemistry. His name was Eamon O'Rourke, and his family, he was a plumber from Castlewellan in County Down in the north of Ireland. And I hung out with them for a few days and just had a beautiful time, visited him on trips after that. I haven't talked to him for more than 30 years. Got the journal out, read those stories, and I thought, I'm going to contact Eamon. And I got a hold of him, and it's still Eamon O'Rourke. And after 30 years, it was so fun to connect with him. That was a beautiful thing. I've also been thinking about moments in my travels that reminded me of humanity, because right now with the COVID pandemic, I'm just very, it's thought-provoking for me to think that this is a fight all of humanity together. We're all together in this challenge. It's not a Cold War where we got us and them, or something like that. It's just all the people are fighting this COVID thing. And when I was 14 years old, it was my first trip to Europe. My parents took me to Norway to see the relatives. I was on the carpet in Bergen of my cousin's home with the cousins, watching Neil Armstrong walk on the moon in 1969. And I remember it vividly, watching the moon landing with a Norwegian language newscaster. And I remember him saying, "En lite skritt for menneskeheten, and a giant leap for mankind," And I remember, it's funny because you think, how aware were you as a 14-year-old tyke, I remember thinking back home, all of my friends are waving American flags. And I'm in Norway here, realizing that all of humanity is celebrating. It was a human accomplishment as much as an American accomplishment. And I don't think a lot of my friends would have thought that had they not had the opportunity to be outside of the United States when Armstrong walked on the moon in 1969. But those are the kind of little moments you have that it's really a shame not to grab them and incorporate them into your outlook. And I've been blessed with that, or cursed with that. I mean, Thomas Jefferson said, travel makes a person wiser, if less happy. You want to be part of the solution. You want to be engaged in the challenges confronting us and so on. You want to reach out and understand that we are not the norm. We're a beautiful 4% of this planet, but we're certainly not the norm. And there's 96% out there. And when we travel, we get to know them. It's humbling and it's joyful all at the same time. And today we are confronted by a problem that I think can bring humanity together if we're thoughtful and play it right. This is the kind of challenges that will be confronting us in the future, I think, going forward. These challenges will be, impervious to conventional defenses. We can spend $1 trillion a year on our defense if we think that's going to make us safer. But the irony is we're going in the wrong direction, because the real risk is going to be things like we're confronted with right now. And that's not combated with tanks and weaponry. It's confronted by embracing science and having good governance and working with other nations together, recognizing that these challenges, they don't get stopped by walls. You could have the biggest wall in the world and they're just going to leap right over it. If we whoop the pandemic here and it's still raging south of the border, we're not safe. So this is a new sensibility I think we're going to come out of this with. And I'm just very hopeful because of that. And I can get that kind of look at things because I take it from a traveler's point of view. I take it with a broader perspective. Somebody who's never traveled thinks in terms of us versus them. And I think if you've traveled, you really think in terms of we.
Thank you, Rick. Any predictions on how the travel industry will change post-COVID?
Everybody's wondering that. And I think it's really a matter of how completely does the vaccine conquer this thing. I mean, how did smallpox change us? How did polio change us? Well, not much. It's just we got to get our shots. Ideally, God willing, we get our shots and this thing becomes something that, okay, you get an annual booster and you can travel on. I think we're on a glide path to normalcy. Now, does that mean no change? I think we'll come out of this with a bigger sensibility towards just safety and hygiene. I mean, people in the Pacific Rim have been wearing masks for years, and until this last year, I didn't get it. Now I understand, maybe if you're in a crowded subway in Paris, you're going to wear a mask. You have that option. That might be the norm. I don't know. and you might have less touch in stuff. I mean, I like to go to a restaurant where you just shine your phone on the menu, on the QR code, and it pops up right like that. You've probably seen that. Well, that's a pretty cool innovation. And I don't need to finger a grubby menu when I'm going to be eating. There'll be innovations like that. But I think a couple of years from now, we're going to look back at this and just think of it as ancient history. And I think travel will basically be what we were used to. To me, it's analogous to an airport. Before terrorism, we can remember that, most of us, you had broad lobbies. Do you remember when there were big, expansive lobbies in airports? You just waltzed right through it. It was really cool. And your loved ones took you right out to the gate. It was part of the ritual of traveling. It was a beautiful thing. Now, of course, those lobbies are gone. They're filled with TSA apparatus. And you don't get anybody to go to the gate with you. The gate is a lonely experience instead of a family celebration experience. But an airport is still an airport, and we still travel. So we don't know exactly how it's going to change. But one thing I am concerned about is you got to pack the house. As long as things are 25% capacity, as long as you sit every other seat on the airplane, it just doesn't pencil out. I'm a businessman. We have something very important called fill rate. We took 30,000 people on our tours in 2019. If you could take 30,000 people on tours and make almost nothing if you had 15 people on a tour. But if you have 25 people on a tour, that's how big our tours get. We had a 98% fill rate. That's very profitable for us, you see. So you got to pack the house. You got to pack the concert hall. You got to pack the airplane. You got to pack the tour bus, the hotel, the restaurant, in order for the staff to be paid well, the product to be quality, where there's a lot of money invested in what you're selling, in order for it to be a good price so people can afford it, in order for it to be profitable for the guy who runs the business to make money at it. You see, all of that is possible if you're efficient. But if you can't get a good fill rate, it all falls apart. It's not sustainable. So I'm waiting for I'm waiting for pack the house instead of social distancing. And I know restaurateurs and hoteliers and airlines and tour organizations and the theaters and musicians and dancing groups, it's the same thing. We got to pack the house. And the only way to pack the house is to get to that herd immunity. And that means we got to get with it when it comes to that vaccination.
So when we do start traveling again, Rick, is there a way that we can do it in a more sort of responsible and ethical way?
This COVID time is a nice time to take a pause. I mean, right now in Europe, the crowded squares are retaken by the local people. I've got friends that live in Rome, and for the first time in their lifetime, local families and children are enjoying Piazza Navona, in the Spanish Steps. It's not overrun by tourists. So Europe is kind of enjoying, my beat is Europe. I mean, if I did other regions, I would be talking about that for examples. But, the question in Europe is this horrible crowd situation. I mean, cities like Salzburg and Amsterdam and Barcelona and Venice and Rome, they were getting to the point where local people were getting a bad attitude about travelers because they were invading and taking over their neighborhoods. Airbnb was ruining entire districts because, the Ramblas in Barcelona, if you've been to Barcelona, that's a wonderful boulevard made characteristic and vibrant because a lot of people lived there. So you got the bird market, and you got the little cigar shop, and you got the thriving marketplace, and you got the old retired guys reading the paper on the benches, and the grandmothers going with their granddaughters over to buy a little a puppy for their apartment and so on. This was what was magic about the Ramblas. Well, all the tourists came there. People started renting out their apartments, not to local pensioners, but to wealthy tourists. And landlords realized the real money is not in renting to a local pensioner, but to a fancy tourist who comes in for 3 days at a time instead of a month-long or a year-long lease or something. And the rent went up. It drove the local people to the suburbs. And then the Ramblas in Barcelona becomes the domain of travelers because of Airbnb. And now you go to the marketplace that was so beloved, and it doesn't sell, beans and carrots and mussels for the locals. It sells fruity, slushy drinks and coconut and fancy fruit on skewers and things for tourists. So it's still a fun area, but it's not what it was. The latest chapter in my guidebook on Barcelona for Ramblas, it just says RIP, rest in peace. So we're gonna have a reassessment of crowds, and towns are gonna decide, yes, it butters our bread, but do we want it buttered that way? That'll be an interesting issue coming out of this. I'm hoping when people travel, they're going to travel a little more thoughtfully and in a way that recognizes and celebrates the diversity on the planet. I think a big issue for people is climate change. To me, this COVID thing is just sort of a sneak preview of what's to come if we don't get a grip on climate change. And I think that I'll just talk a little bit about climate change, because that to me is the main ethical challenge for a person like me who runs a business encouraging people to travel. You can be flight shamed out of traveling because of climate change, because flying to Europe puts as much carbon into the atmosphere as driving your car for 6 months, or you can mitigate the bad you create when you travel. And I think the value of travel is really important. The best way for our world to become dangerous, the best way for our country to become vulnerable is if we stop traveling and we don't know people outside of our borders. When you have a wall and people don't connect, the younger generation is saddled with the parents' baggage, and they never are able to work things out. They're just at odds with each other, and we can't afford that in the world going forward. We need to travel. That's the way you get to know people who are supposed to be your enemies, and you come home and you realize the world's filled with joy and love and beautiful people, and that's one of my favorite souvenirs. But we need to travel, but we also need to travel in a sustainable way. How do you do that? Well, I think you embrace the concept of mitigation. Scientists say, and I've read a lot about this, I'm not a scientist, but I trust their findings. If an American who cares about climate change flies to Europe and back, that creates a lot of carbon, and that exacerbates the climate change problem. If you smartly spend $30 into something that mitigates climate change, it could be carbon offsets here. I like to invest in farmers in the third world to help them farm in a way that contributes less, because it helps the farmers and it also mitigates the carbon. But if you do that, $30 mitigates the carbon one American creates by flying to Frankfurt and back. So I just decided, as a tour organizer, I took 30,000 people to Europe in 2019. I made more money than I should have because I wasn't paying my way from a carbon point of view. I gave myself a self-imposed carbon tax as a business, as I wish my government would have done. And I charged myself $30 per person times 30,000, $900,000 rounded up to $1 million. And I gave away $1 million to 10 organizations that are helping farmers and villagers in the developing world do their work, live their lives in a way that contributes less to climate change. And it is so exciting what we're able to accomplish doing that, protecting forests, helping smallholder farmers do their work in a way that the land is terraced. So when the water comes down, the rain in torrents, it soaks into the land right there, and then they can pull it out and irrigate with it. They can have climate smart seeds that can survive the droughts. They can treat their land better and contribute less carbon when they do their farming. It's a huge, huge opportunity. And so we found 10 organizations, we gave them each $100,000, and then we did it as a group. And the 30,000 people that traveled with us have the peace of mind of knowing that they traveled to Europe in a carbon neutral kind of way. Is it heroic? No. Is it, it's just mitigating our flight. I mean, but it's a good thing. And to me, it's an ethical thing for a businessman. And that's called the Rick Steves Climate Smart Initiative. And we have it explained on my website. And right at the top, it says, if you're a tour organizer, steal this program and don't credit me. It's just time that we paid a carbon tax so we could fly with our travelers, with our families, with our customers in a carbon neutral kind of way. I think we got to get serious about climate change. And when you travel tuned into that, you see it in silly kind of ways that are not these life-threatening ways, that when you've got a sea level city being inundated by a storm surge, or when you have a whole swath of a country that used to be fertile and now it's a wasteland because it's in a drought and there's no more rain there, or when you're in a country that used to have rain come sprinkling beautifully for months and now you get the same amount of rain, but it all comes in 2 days and it washes the topsoil away. These are tragedies. But even as a traveler, you see little indications that things are really different. In Europe, you used to buy a bullfight ticket in the sun or the shade, depending on how much you wanted to spend, because it was too hot in the sun, so you'd spend more to be in the shade. It's so darn hot now, they move the bullfights later in the night and everything's in the shade. That's just to survive the heat in Spain in the summer. You can't be out in the sun at a bullfight anymore. When you go to Munich, it seems like people eat outdoors like they always have, but that's a new phenomenon. They didn't used to do that. When you go skiing in Switzerland, or when you go hiking in Switzerland, you'll notice the ski lifts all come with plumbing to create snow. You don't build a ski lift in Switzerland anymore without having it plumbed so you can create your own snow. When you go to towns in south of England, you find little tiny water gates at the bottom of each cobbled lane to protect it from floods when you get these really unprecedented high tides that they didn't have for centuries before. And now they've put in these little flood barriers. When you go to Rotterdam, there's 1 million people that live in this Rotterdam area, and they've got this storm surge barrier that's as big as 2 Eiffel Towers on their side on wheels. And when there's a threat, they pull it together and they protect that from the storm surge coming in. New York and New Orleans and cities like that could use something like that. And the Dutch have done it. The Dutch, as frugal as they are, they certainly don't want to waste any money, the famous Dutch, but they're spending billions of euros fortifying their dikes and raising the banks and making these storm surge barriers. So it's a fascinating time. And long-winded answer to your question, Lawrence, if we want to travel ethically coming out of this COVID thing, I think we need to get serious about climate change. And I want to stress, it doesn't mean not traveling. It means mitigating the carbon you create when you travel. And then I think you have a stewardship kind of responsibility when you spend the money and when you spend the carbon to travel and get to know the world, to come home and help our country fit better into this ever smaller planet. That's what I call travel as a political act. And I wrote a whole book about it. But to me, that's an exciting thing to do. And I think travel can be a force for peace. But we all have to walk the talk when we travel and we get out of our comfort zone. We get culture shock. A lot of people try to avoid culture shock. I gravitate toward culture shock. Culture shock is a positive, constructive thing. It's the growing pains of a broadening perspective. And I seek it out. And then I fly home with that best souvenir. And that's a friendly relationship with the rest of the world.
Thanks, Rick. So seeking it out probably means you try to meet as many of the locals as you can. Do you have any special techniques or ways that you meet the locals when you travel to Europe?
Oh boy, basically become a chameleon. I'm like physically a cultural chameleon when I travel. I just embrace whatever's local. Let's think about drinks. If I'm in England, well, here in this hemisphere, tea makes no sense to me. I don't even think I've ever made a pot of tea, really. But when I go to England, a spot of tea after a long day of sightseeing feels really nice. And every bed and breakfast room has the little tea maker, and I just enjoy it. When I go to Scotland, I buy a little bottle of whiskey and I have a wee nip every night. It's a ritual for me. I don't drink whiskey in this hemisphere. When I go to Prague, I never have wine. I have the best beer in Europe. When I go to Tuscany, I never have beer. I have my favorite wine in all of Europe, and I know what wine I like. I don't know a lot of Italian words, but I know the word for full-bodied, corposo. Corposo vino rosso, per favore. And I'm one happy camper. When I never come home after a long day of work here in Seattle and crave a nice cloudy glass of ouzo. But when I'm on a Greek island, I don't let a sunset go down without finding a nice little corner and ordering a glass of ouzo and savoring it with that sort of, every sunset to me is a devotional when I'm traveling, and to have a local drink, it's a nice thing. But those are all just fun ways to be a temporary local, people like to say. Well, that's a way to meet locals, because when you're doing it the local way, locals respect you. They want to talk to you. They'll give you a better deal. They'll get more smiles. You can take the initiative. If I'm in a university town in Italy and it's the end of the day, sun's going down, it's the magic hour, I'll go to the piazza that has all the students hanging out. And I'm just an old American guy that speaks English. I don't speak Italian. I go to that piazza knowing I'm really interesting to those Italian students. and I'll find some students and I'll buy you a round of drinks. And it's like $4, $3 a drink. I'll buy four drinks. I've all of a sudden got 4 friends and I'm drinking what they're drinking, a spritz. That's what all the kids are drinking in Italy. And I'm their window on America. They've got questions. What is the Electoral College? How does that work? You know, if you want to have one very interesting little bit of conversation, get a tight definition of the Electoral College. It really baffles a lot of Europeans. But I want to be their window to America. They've been getting all this media. Now they've got an American friend. When you're in England, when you're in Ireland or Scotland, the pubs, it just sounds like a platitude almost, but the pubs, that's where it's the public house. People have small homes. They go to the neighborhood pub. It's a multi-generational thing. You bring the kids, you bring grandma, you throw darts, you tell stories, you have dinner, you have a shandy or you have a beer, you meet the traveler who's there. Now, if you're a good traveler, you don't sit at the table, you sit at the bar, because the etiquette is if you're sitting at a table, people give you your space. But if you sit at the bar, they know you're there to talk and you're from far away and you're an interesting person, and you'll strike up a conversation. And now you're meeting somebody who's not the woman in the hula skirt that gives you a lei when you land in Honolulu, or the person in the dirndl who gives you a pretzel when you land at Munich. You're part of the party rather than part of the economy. And we as good travelers can make that happen. I think take advantage of opportunities where you really can connect. One of my favorite countries is Ireland. And I think it's my favorite country in part because in Ireland, I enjoy the sensation that I'm understanding a foreign language. I just speak English, nothing to brag about. But in Ireland, they got that wonderful lilt and they've got this gift of gab. That means they're just enthusiastic about talking and they are artful conversationalists. And I want to be there and enjoy it. I'll be over on that far bluff of Ireland, and I'll meet 2 old timers, and I'll ask one guy, "Where are you born?" He says, I asked him, "Were you born here?" And he said, "No, it was about 5 miles down the road, And I asked him, "Have you lived here all your life?" He said, "Not yet." These Irish, they just love to just have artful conversation, and you're a blessing for them if you're just available to talk. So as travelers, we need to put ourselves in a situation where locals can meet us, whether it's at a pub in Ireland or on a piazza in some university town in Italy.
Thanks, Rick. Great answers. We've got so many questions now queued up from our communities and from our front row audience that why don't we move on and take some of those questions, and we'll start with our front row studio audience. I'll call on you one by one, and we'll turn your microphone on. And if you'd make sure that your video is on when you ask the question, that'd be great. And why don't we start with Janet. Janet, turn on your video, tell us where you're from, and please ask your question.
I'm Janet Clausen. I live in Lawton, Michigan. I've been a Rick Steves fan since there was a Rick Steves. I think you've definitely had an impact on my lifestyle as far as travel goes. My question for Rick is, how have you changed your way of travel as you've gotten older?
Well, thank you, Janet. It's been, I love to hear people who've traveled with me for a long time. I wrote my first book 40 years ago now, and I'm really a fortunate person to have found my niche. And I spend 100 days every year traveling and getting my material update and coming home. And for me, Europe's my beat, and I'm just working real hard to inspire people to venture beyond Orlando. But my travel styling has changed. Fundamentally, it's the same. It's getting close to the ground and meeting people and having new experiences. But as I've gotten older and wealthier, I've realized time is a very limited resource. We Americans have the shortest vacations in the rich world, and we always want to see too much. And I realized you need to have a smart itinerary, and you need to not try to see everything. And you need to remember, a budget trick is not a budget trick if it assumes your time is worthless. Getting on a bus instead of a taxi may save you $5, but it may cost you 20 minutes. And if you choose that, you're saying your time is worth $15 an hour while you're in Europe. I think your time is worth a lot more than $15 an hour while you're in Europe. And if that's the case, you don't want to save $5 by or the net savings would be $2 or $3 by hopping on a bus. You want to grab a taxi and get there in a hurry. That can be a budget trick, you see. So I see time as a precious resource as well as my money. I also realize that the more you bring to a place in context and understanding, the more you'll get out of it. So if you go to Tallinn in Estonia, which is just a 90-minute hydrofoil ride from Helsinki. If you're in Helsinki, you spice it up by going across the bay to Tallinn. If you've seen the movie The Singing Revolution, you'll understand that the people of the Baltic countries, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, they were outgunned by the Soviet Union. And they say, when you're surrounded with Germans on this side and Russians on that side, you're going to be hopelessly outgunned. And what they said is, we can sing to remind people that we're here. And their best defense was singing. And they had this thing called the Singing Revolution. And it's an amazing story of how the beautiful Estonians sang for their independence. And they were inspired the rest of the Eastern Europeans to break away from Moscow with their song. And having watched that movie before I went to Estonia gave me a much, much better insight into that culture. And I was a privileged tourist, not because I spoke the language or had a lot of money, but because I brought a little bit of context with me. So I'm really into that, Janet, when it comes to traveling better. People are really interested in experiences these days. I don't have a bucket list. A lot of people ask me how many countries I've been to, and I've made a point not even to count it up. It might be interesting to know, but what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. I could have been to that many airports. I could have learned nothing. How many preconceptions have you challenged and changed? How many friends have you made? How many ways have you found that we're not, the world's not a pyramid with us on top and everybody else trying to figure it out and be like us? I've got the American dream, but the American dream is not the only dream. My Norwegian relatives have the Norwegian dream. My friends in Bulgaria have the Bulgarian dream. I've been in Sri Lanka, and people clearly there have the Sri Lankan dream. My parents raised me with the work ethic. This is the work ethic. No, Mom, it's not the work ethic. It's a work ethic. My friends in Spain have a different work ethic. It's not right or wrong. If you're all about making more money, maybe this is the work ethic, but some people would rather have different family values. And I just find that so stimulating. I just love it. So I get out of my comfort, my norms. I just love to put myself in a situation where I'm the oddball, I got on an airplane in India, went to the bathroom, and there was a decal over the toilet that showed with a stick figure how you should not stand on the rim and squat over this toilet. And it occurred to me, there are actually people that need to be reminded, you don't stand on this toilet and squat over it. And they're not lesser than us. They just don't need to sit on something when they go to the bathroom. I just love that we're the odd ones that sit on a toilet. We don't like to think that we're the odd ones, but we are. I'm a Lutheran. I think this is the norm. My green hymnal is the normal way to be a Lutheran. There's more Lutherans in Namibia than there are in the United States. And that's a good thing to remind ourselves about. And some people don't want that. Some people, they just don't have a passport. They don't have any curiosity. Their worldview is dictated to them by commercial news media, and they're frightened people. They don't say bon voyage. They say have a safe trip. And they would never go. They don't even have a passport. That's not my lifestyle, but I'm lucky that it could have been my lifestyle, but I'm just a fortunate kid whose parents dragged him to Europe when he was a little kid. And then I realized this world's a fun place to get to know.
Thanks, Rick. That's a great answer. Let's move on to our next question. Debbie, if you wouldn't mind turning on your video and introducing yourself, say where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Debbie Stewart from Perry, Michigan. And I love all your answers, Rick. Thank you. And I love that you're concerned about climate change. And I was wondering if you have ever gone or plan to go to like a polluted area to bring recognition to a problem or a troubled community that you want to somehow help out by visiting.
Yeah. I've there's a lot of different causes you can embrace when you travel. And as a person who embraces a lot of causes, I have a joy of picking and choosing what I want to embrace. I'm very interested in economic justice. I'm very interested in drug policy reform. I'm interested in affordable housing, So affordable housing in a third world point of view is land rights. Can a peasant buy land in a country where there's no deeds and where, the indigenous people don't believe that you should own land? Who gets to control the land? Well, it's the big shots in the city that push the indigenous people out without much of a fight at all. So I travel a lot trying to learn about causes I really care about. I don't like walls. I was just in the Holy Land, and there's a wall between Israel and Palestine. I mean, you could make a case that wall was necessary. Israel built it to be safer from terrorists. But the unintended consequence of that wall is that the young people on both sides of that wall are saddled with their parents' baggage, and they can't talk to each other. And the whole situation becomes more entrenched. And then people with an agenda and people way over on the extremes of either side can cause there to be just terrible heartbreak. In Ireland, they overcame that. The kids went to camps in the summer, the Protestant kids and the Catholic kids, and they danced together. And they realized, hey, it doesn't matter if our parents are Catholic or Protestant. We're all Irish, and we can live together, and we can have our own heritage. I just went to Ethiopia and Guatemala in the year before the pandemic. I went once to scout and then once to film. And one thing I wanted to do is raise awareness in the United States that you can fight hunger because you believe in love thy neighbor, or you can fight hunger because you're just more interested in your own security and your family's security, and you want the world to be a safer and more stable place. Frankly, I don't really care as long as we fight hunger. You can do it for both reasons. I fight hunger because I think it's a very important way to love your neighbor, and it's walking the talk if you embrace that kind of ethic. So I wanted to show America the practical value of development aid, of foreign aid, and how that we could. I was just reading, we've spent $2 trillion in Afghanistan in the last 20 years. $2 trillion, $2,000 billion. With that much money, we could overcome hunger on this planet. We can't overcome poverty. Half of the world is living on $5 a day. Okay, that's just the way it is. But 10% of humanity is trying to live on $2 a day. That's extreme poverty. That's hopelessness. That's obscene in a country with as much wealth as we have. When you have 10% of humanity trying to live on less than $2 a day, we could grapple with that. And if we did, the world would be a safer and a more stable place, as well as a more just place. So, that's something that I try to incorporate, that kind of thinking in my travels. One thing I'd like to do, we have 40 different itineraries in my Rick Steves Europe tour program. And one itinerary I would love to do would be a European contemporary challenges and issues and affairs tour that would go from Stockholm or Copenhagen down through Germany and Holland and Belgium and visit all sorts of clever ways they're dealing with their European social sensibilities with problems that are confounding and confronting us also. The whole range of challenges: healthcare, environment, climate change, mass incarceration, opioid addiction, green economy, you name it. There's so much that Europe's doing, and it's not an initiative to say Europe's right and we're wrong. It's an initiative to get together and compare notes. And I would love to do that as a tour. It'd be a great 10 or 12 day tour. And that would be a way for people to actually kind of do what you're suggesting, Debbie, is travel in a way where you get exposed to these things, and then you can come home and be more thoughtful about it.
Great answer, Rick.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. Judy, let's move to you. Tell us where you're from and ask your question for Rick.
Hi, Rick. My name's Judy Habitler, and I live in Allegan, Michigan, which is on the southwest coast. of Michigan.
Mhm.
And my question for you is, with the pandemic, many of us would like to escape to a secluded island. I know I'm one of them. Which is the best island destination you've ever experienced and why?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, first of all, Judy, I spend 100 days a year traveling, but it's not like I'm on vacation for 100 days of the year. I don't really go on vacation. I go to Europe. I love my work so much. I go to Europe to update my guidebooks, lead my tours, and make my TV shows. And so I'm busy doing that, and I'm not complaining about it. I get great joy out of it. Hey, my dogs just got here. Hi, you guys. I get great joy out of my dogs now when I can't travel. And when I'm in Europe, and that's my beat, my favorite country would be India, Indonesia, Thailand, Southeast Asia, Japan. Central America, I've got lots of favorite countries. But my beat as a travel teacher is to help Americans enjoy Europe. For me, Europe is the sort of springboard for world travel, world adventure. And I'm just trying, as I joked earlier, to inspire Americans to venture beyond Orlando. In the case of Europe, frankly, I don't like the islands. It's where Europeans go for their Cancun or their Mazatlan, and they'll go to those islands. And Europe is a very densely populated continent of lemming sun worshippers, and they all like to go to the same place, and they can endure horrible crowds just to be, on the beach and enjoy the sunshine. So I'm not really big into islands in Europe. And one thing I'd love to do if I could go somewhere on vacation is the South Pacific, but and I'm not that hot on the Caribbean. I don't like the climate in the Caribbean because it's just, for me, too hot, and the culture seems so similar. I'll tell you, maybe a good answer to your question would be, I surprisingly like a European cruise more than most people would think I like. A cool thing about a cruise is and the whole issue about how safe is it after COVID, that remains to be seen, but I think they're going to survive and get back on their feet. But a cool thing about a cruise is, you got the efficiency of this floating, comfortable American resort. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you travel at night, enjoying your American resort with your American friends. And then you got 12 hours a day, every day a different country to explore. And you can be the lemming kind of herd of a sheep kind of traveler and just get on the bus and follow the directions. Or you can equip yourself with a guidebook and leave that cruise and not see any indication of your cruise crowd all day long, and then get back onto the cruise ship before the boat takes off. And then you're doing a good job. There's 3,000 tourists on a cruise ship normally. And 1,000 of them, by my estimate, are not travelers at all. They're just looking for a floating alternative to Las Vegas. 1,000 of them are bucket list kind of travelers. They want to see all these places before they die, and they better hurry up. And then 1,000 of them are actually travelers that just like to move into one hotel, that don't want to be relocating all the time, that like the economy and efficiency and no stress of a cruise ship doing all of that travel and accommodations and meals kind of work. And then every day they get out and celebrate a new country in a great city. I mean, think about it. Barcelona, the French Riviera, the Italian Riviera, Rome, Sicily, Mykonos, Santorini, Dubrovnik, Ephesus, Naples, wonderful, wonderful places. And I really like, if I was going to think of sort of an island, I think my answer would be a cruise ship where I would have a different beach and a different port every day.
Great answer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Rick. Our next question is from Lee. Lee, go ahead, ask your question.
Hi.
Hey,
Hi,
Lee.
Rick. Hi, everyone. Rick, my question, is there a place that you've traveled to that you could actually see yourself living there? And if so, can you explain why that place?
I think the interesting answer to your question is there's no place I could see myself living. For some reason, I love to travel, but I'm so anchored right here. I think Lawrence might have mentioned that in the introduction. I can look out my window, just like I can look out my office and see my junior high school. I mean, I haven't ventured very far, but I've spent a third of my adult life living out of carry on the airplane size suitcase overseas. So I am really thankful to be able to come back home. And I'm cut out to live right here in Seattle. The only thing that would drive me away from this place is if the weather became really nice. I'm just like a kind of like a lizard living in a terrarium here with a lot of plane tickets to get a break from that. And but I've toyed with living in Europe. Part of my problem is I'm hopeless when it comes to languages. Other people, my cameraman, he picks up the language wherever we go. My son and my daughter both picked up languages. I'm not wired to learn languages. I probably could, but I just not wired. So I'm at a huge disadvantage that way. So if I went to Europe, I wouldn't want to be the kind of expat that did not speak the local language. So I'd be limited to living in Britain, which is not one of my favorite, would not be one of my favorite places to live. If I spoke the language, I could imagine living in Paris or Milano or Vienna. I'd love to live in Vienna. Vienna would be a great place. I almost bought a little villa in Italy on a hill town in the middle of Tuscany, and it was situated right in sort of a grand canyon of Tuscany, and it had Etruscan cellars below it that went back centuries before Christ. And I almost bought it, but then I thought if I bought this, I'd have to come here all the time. And one thing I love about my style of travel is I get to go everywhere. I get to go wherever my dreams are taking me. I was booked on a flight to Istanbul when I had to cancel my trips last summer because of COVID. I could go to Norway and see my relatives. I could go to Ireland and hike on the West Coast. I could go island hopping in the Greek Sea. There's so many places I could go. So I would rather live here and use this home as a springboard for world travel.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. Wow, we've got a lot of questions here, so we'll queue these up for us as fast as we can, and
I'll try to answer my questions quicker, Lawrence, so we can get to more of them.
We'll go rapid fire from here on.
Okay, good idea.
Elaine, let's go to you next.
Thank you. Hi, Rick. We're Elaine and Steve Olson. We are in Centennial, Colorado, and you have kind of addressed my question already, so I'm going to reword it a little bit. Besides the moon landing experience, can you tell us what particular experience in your travels has impacted you the most?
Well, the political fire in my belly was lit when I went to Central America during the Sandinista times. I used to be a Republican, and I used to be my country right or wrong, and I used to be peace through strength. And then I went down, and as I left for Central America, I remember my dad took me to the airport, and he knew with the discussion that was going on, and he knew I was curious to learn about it. And the last thing he said was, son, he said it very lovingly, but he said, son, don't be duped. In other words, don't go down there and reconsider the way you're supposed to see world affairs from an American point of view, And I went down there and I realized how I had been betrayed in so many ways by my country to be able to understand what is the reality on this planet. And it sent me down a very interesting path. And I'm really thankful for that. But to be able to see economic injustice just south of our border, and also to be able to see the complexity of that issue as it relates to our country, it broke my heart. It absolutely broke my heart. Jeb Bush, this was when, I forget who was president, but Jeb Bush was sent down as an emissary to El Salvador. And he made a TV ad, and they ran this ad in an election in El Salvador, and it said, if you vote for the left-wing party, the United States will have to stop all remittances. And 25% of the economy was money sent home to El Salvador by Salvadorans living and working in the United States. And it showed a video of an old lady opening up a letter from her son who was working in America, and it said, I cannot send you any more money. Jeb Bush actually went down there and made a TV ad to scare all the people into thinking 25% of their economy would end if they voted for the equivalent of the Democrat. And the right-winger won. And that ushered in a time of, I think, less justice for peasants and so on. And to see that, and to realize that I'm an American taxpayer, and as a person who takes responsibility for what our government does, to really know and reckon with the fact that for every bomb that falls and every bullet that flies has my name on it. And I'm not a pacifist. We've got to use our military sometimes, and innocent people even have to die sometimes, but it's a big deal. And I take personal responsibility for that. And I want to go there and I want to know what is the truth. I don't want the truth to be spoon-fed to me. The truth about Iran, I think, was spoon-fed to us by the Iran hostage crisis. I mean, what most well-educated people like you and me knew about Iran was what we learned from Ted Koppel, right? I was totally into that. And then I decided I want to fly to Iran and talk to these people. And I made a TV show about it. But you don't know Iran unless you go there. There's no way to know Iran unless you go there. You don't know Nicaragua unless you go there. And, it complicates your life. As I said, Thomas Jefferson said, travel makes a person wiser, if less happy. Oh, it's more complicated than I realized. Muhammad said, don't tell me how educated you are, tell me how much you've traveled. The whole idea about making that Hajj to Mecca is to get away from your home. You learn more about your home when you leave it and you look at it from a distance. I'm kind of like the medieval jester as a travel writer and a tour guide. The medieval jester 1,000 years ago in Europe was paid for by the king, given room and board in order to leave the castle and go out with the people, the peasants in the barrio, and find out what are the jokes they're telling and what do they really think and so on. And then to come back into the castle and tell the king the truth. And the king needed it. He paid for that annoyance. And I really feel like travel is that way. If my government says I can't go somewhere, that's probably the first place I want to go. Why don't they want me to go there? I'm sorry. Is that wrong? I don't think that's wrong. I want to know what these people are like. And I find that, cool thing about travel is when you go to visit people who are supposed to be your enemies, they get to know you, and it makes it very tough for their propaganda to dehumanize us as a people. If we don't go there and they never meet us, then they're just as malleable as we are. And then when you go home, it makes it tougher for our propaganda to dehumanize them. That's a powerful thing. That is really a powerful thing. And, we can think that we're strong enough to call our shots and control the world, but the world's a complicated and mighty and beautiful place. And, we're 4% of it. 4%. I want to get out there and get to know the other 96%. So, Lawrence, I was going to give you shorter answers, but Elaine asked me one that got me going. So I spent a little more time on that.
Indeed.
Thanks, Elaine.
Uncut. Let's go to our next question from Shirley.
Rick, what intrigues you about your travel? Do you prefer the history or the architecture or what other aspect of travel do you really, it's yours?
Shirley, that is such a good question, because I've got a friend who writes a book about cuisine, and he gets to the culture through the cuisine. And I'm not a gourmet that way. I like the food, but I get to the culture through the history and the art. And I've always thought that. I made a choice in college. I can learn a foreign language, or I can learn to appreciate the art and the history. And I ended up getting a history degree in European history, and I just love the art. I absolutely love the art. And for me as a teacher, the art, to appreciate the art just carbonates the whole experience. When you go to Europe, a lot of people go to museums because, like I used to go to museums because my mom said it's a crime not to. You got to go to that museum when you're in this town. And I was surrounded by people looking like they're having a good time. And I just thought, how could anybody enjoy this? They must be faking it, just trying to look sophisticated. And then I took an art history class. I went back to those same museums, altogether different experience. So I find art is like a time tunnel experience. It takes you back. And then appreciating history properly requires being able to go back. You don't know how bold and courageous Martin Luther was to stand up against the Roman Catholic Church back when regular people were not allowed to read the Bible because it was only legal in Latin, which was a very clever way to keep it away from the people because they might get some bad ideas if they were empowered by reading it directly. So for Martin Luther to be able to translate it and not be burned at the stake was quite a trick. Many people had tried it and many people were burned at the stake. You remember the image in Tiananmen Square with that one dissident standing in front of the tank? 500 years ago, that was Martin Luther in the Catholic Church. To understand the complexity the scariness of that problem, not from our point of view. Oh, big deal. A German guy translated the Bible, but 500 years ago, when people were immersed in religious thoughts and religion permeated society, and it was dictated. And if you dared challenge that, all hell would break loose. In fact, it did. Europe was enmeshed in 100 years of war after that. A third of Germany was killed. It was called the First World War, actually, the religious wars, after Martin Luther pulled the plug on that. That's tumultuous times. And to go back there and to realize, oh, Gutenberg made the printing press. Oh, Martin Luther had a friend who was a good artist. Oh, Martin Luther knew how to write in a way that people would read it. You put that all together, you have a great pamphlet with all sorts of powerful thoughts. You have a political artist that can give you the wonderful visuals. And then you got a Gutenberg printing press. And all of a sudden you got this crazy monk is the first guy in history to go viral. People could read it because it was in their dialect. And it was affordable because it was mass produced with a printing press. And you get the Reformation. See, this is what happens to me when I'm a tour guide with people right there in Germany, and I'm right in front of one of those printing presses. It's so exciting to understand the context of what you're looking at. So for me, that's one of the great joys of travel, and I just love it. So I get to Europe, surely in that way, through the history and through the art.
Great answer, Rick. Let's go to Nikki for our next question.
Hello, Rick and everyone.
Hey, Nikki.
I'm going to do an about face. This is a very practical question, and so your answer will probably be a whole lot shorter. When my husband and I would go on one of your tours, we always overpacked. And one of the, I was wondering what the essentials you feel are the most difficult to buy over there, that you should really bring on a trip for 2 to 3 weeks.
Well, Nikki, packing is critical. As I mentioned, we took 30,000 people on our tours in a normal year, and none of them are allowed to carry any more than a carry on the airplane size bag to start the trip with. 9 by 22 by 14 inches. That's our self-imposed limit. I live out of a bag like this for 3 months at a time, and it's no hardship. It's sort of an enlightenment. If I had Sherpas, I'd set them free. I just enjoy packing light. I think Europe, you can buy essentially anything you need in Europe, but I would say it's really important not to be going over there wondering what kind of good shoes are you going to use. You got to have shoes that are well broken in and that work for you. I think the major item of bulk in your luggage is your clothing. And I think that, for me, it's just limiting the clothing. You just wash a little as you go instead of waiting for a big load of laundry to pile up. So it's not that tough to pack light. I would remind you that there's 2 kinds of travelers, those who pack light and those who wish they pack light. And you just need to get serious about that in advance. And there's no excuses. I mean, man, woman, 2 weeks, 2 months, rich, poor, north, south, winter, summer. It doesn't matter. I pack that way. The women on my staff, I've got 100 people that work with me. Most of them are women. We all pack with a carry on the airplane size bag. And it's a great benefit to have a carry on the airplane size bag to start with. And it lets you be much more mobile and less taken advantage of in your travels. If a person is unable to carry their bags around on their own, right away, they're in a situation where, you just are going to have more reliance on other people, and it's going to cost you more. So I just think there's nothing I really think about, Nikki, that's, I got to bring a lot of this from home. If they don't have it over there, my first thought is, how can 400 million people live without it? Because they probably are doing just fine without it. So I'm pretty fanatic about that. I've got a 1-hour lecture on my website about packing. And I know I have almost no credibility among women. So there's also a 1-hour lecture by one of our women guides who is just brilliant about packing for women. But you'll really be happy if you get serious about packing light.
Great answer, Rick. Let's take a couple more questions and then we'll think about wrapping up here. Arlene, how about next question from you?
Hi. I love traveling, same as you do, for the purpose of meeting people. And I am newly a solo traveler. And I'd like to know if you have any hints for how a female solo traveler can meet the people, because my best memories are not the art, it's not the people, it's not the things I've seen, it's the people I've met and how they've interacted with me with them. How do I do that alone safely?
Right. That's a great and important question, Arlene. I would say from a practical point of view, you're going to have better luck meeting other travelers when you're on the road and doing things that are really interesting to you, that where you're not alone and you've got a small group of people that get to know each other over the course of that experience. Experiences are really trendy. Cooking lessons, food tours, bicycle tours, a chance to make a fresco. There's plenty of things you can do that are hands-on. You get your fingers dirty in this or that slice of the culture, and you're hanging out with other tourists, laughing, having a good time. And then you realize, oh, they're a single traveler too, or it's a couple, and we seem to click. Let's have dinner together. I think that really helps. I'm a big fan of food tours all over Europe. It takes four hours to go on a food tour. You visit 6 or 7 places. It's affordable. You get a meal out of it. You make a friend with the guide. And you really get an interesting look at the artisan end of the little foodie places, the creative, what's happening now in that culture. And it's a perfect way to have fun during the tour and to make friends for possibly after the tour. I think what you could do, I do not really like TripAdvisor for eating and sleeping recommendations, but I really appreciate it for things to do. That's the third pillar of what TripAdvisor offers. It's free. And you go over there, you're in Salzburg, and you go to TripAdvisor and you say things to do in Salzburg. And then you can see, oh, there's this gin tasting experience. There's this Sound of Music tour. There's a bike ride along the river. Oh, here's a chance to go to the salt mine. Oh, here's a food tour. And all of these opportunities get you with locals, and they get you experiences, and you are rubbing shoulders with other travelers. One thing, when you look at my TV show, Arlene, it's like I have friends everywhere. I'm always introducing my friend and fellow tour guide. Well, I'm just paying these people essentially to be my friends. They're hardworking local guides, and I book them, and then they meet me at the hotel and they show me around, whether I'm researching my guidebooks or whether I'm making a TV show. All of them would love to be your friend for half a day or a full day. It's kind of expensive, but I'll tell you, the local guides, and they're everywhere, they're half as much money per day and twice as important in the cheaper countries, in the more difficult countries, in Poland, in Turkey, in Morocco, in Greece, in Bosnia. You will find guides for $200 a day or $100 for half a day. In London, it'll cost you $500 a day, you see. And you don't need one in London. You need one in Bosnia, or you need one in Morocco. So I would say you could team up with other people and hire a guide. You could just book these guides in advance, but that's a great opportunity to not be lonely when you're on the road. I hope that's some helpful for you.
Great question. Let's take one more from Sharon. Sharon, what's your question for Rick?
Oh, am I unmuted? Okay, my question is as Americans, when we go traveling, what do we do that aggravate the people in the countries that we're visiting? And how can we avoid these behaviors?
That's so fundamental and important. I've studied the ugly American problem for about 30 years, and I've sort of ready to make my final paper, my final report. A lot of Americans are treated like ugly Americans, and it's because they are ugly Americans. They're not bad people. They're just ethnocentric. That's what ugly American is. It's ethnocentric. You don't find ugly Danes. You don't find ugly Czechs. You find ugly Russians, ugly Germans, ugly Chinese, ugly Americans. What do those countries have in common? They're big. If you're coming from a big culture, it's easy for you to think you're the norm, and then, you see Indian travelers coming from Bombay or something to Europe, and they act like they own the place. Well, India kind of does. It's 1 billion people. So what you want to do as an American is just to be aware of your surroundings and try to melt in, and don't compare things back to what's at home, but just celebrate it. If they're eating barnacles in Portugal, well, eat the barnacles. It's fun. You don't have to like them, but eat them. You wash it down with local beer. It's one of my favorite treats. The French are really into stinky cheese. Get the stinkiest cheese you can find. Don't ask for your American cheddar cheese. You want to kind of embrace the local tempo. One thing that really bothers me when I'm traveling with my fellow countrymen is how noisy we can be. We live in a land with a lot of elbow room, and we just can make lots of noise and not bother people. Europeans live in very tight quarters. They live in small apartments with thin walls, and they live right on top of each other, and they're softer. It's simple. If I go to a restaurant, or if I'm in a train car and I can hear one conversation, more often than not, it's an American conversation. Everybody on that train car is having to listen to these noisy Americans talk about baseball. And it's just ugly that they would think that they can interrupt everybody's silence. So listen, be soft, fit in, embrace the local ways, and then people will love you. It doesn't matter who's president. It doesn't matter what war is going on. I've always found that people like American individuals, until you prove otherwise. So don't ever let somebody tell you the French don't like Americans. The French don't like Americans telling them how to cook their steak, or how they should do this or that, because the French are pretty proud people. But if you go to France with a genuine curiosity and respect for their culture, I find they're as friendly as anybody else. Now, if you're going to the big city in the middle of the summer when it's really hot and sweaty and anybody with any money is out of there, and you're in Paris and it's inundated with all sorts of noisy tourist group putting ketchup on their meat and butchering their language, well, they're going to be kind of crabby. Well, you're in the worst possible scenario. You're talking to a French person who doesn't have the money to get out of town when all of her neighbors could, and she has to deal with you, and you don't speak her language, and you're mad that she doesn't speak your language. And so you got to remember the situation that people are in who you're dealing with, and cut them a little slack if they're not as, they don't have a smiley face culture over there. We have a smile and be a winner culture, and banks fine their tellers if they don't wish everybody to have a happy day. Europeans find that quite disingenuine, whatever. They find it not truthful, and they're more frank that way. But I find that Europeans love Americans, and you have to work pretty hard to be an ugly American.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Let's take one question from Facebook from Deborah Ann. What circumstances might cause you to rule out visiting a particular destination, or on the other hand, make a destination one that's not to be missed?
Well, some people don't go to a place because they want to boycott it. They don't like the government there. And I've never really seen the logic in that. If the government is bad, they need a visit from a reasonable, friendly American, just to know that the world's a good place and America's a good place. So I've never boycotted a country. I've disagreed strongly with its government, but I go there and I like to make connections. We're a breath of fresh air to countries that are in tough times. And what makes me want to go to a place, people ask me, where's everybody going? What's the tip? When I get an interview, Rick Steves, where's everybody going? And I don't care what the exchange rate is. I don't care where the new museum is. I don't care where the opera's doing this or that. You should go where your travel dreams are taking you. If you've got kids at an age where you'd love them to see the old country and your family is Irish, take them to Ireland. If you just feel like, soaking up the sun and lots of nice seafood and folkloric culture on the beach, go to Greece. If you feel like getting into nature, go to Switzerland. If you want big city thrills, go to Paris. It doesn't matter what the exchange rate is. It doesn't matter what the news is. It just matters where your travel dreams are taking you. So that's what I would say.
Thanks, Rick. And then there's one, it's not a question so much as it's a comment that I think you'll appreciate. It's from Lizbeth, who posted the question at Facebook. Can you post the agencies that Mr. Steve mentioned that he donates for the struggling farmers overseas? I always donate locally in the USA, and he opened up my eyes regarding donations.
That is such a nice question. I was going to spend $1 million to make our company carbon neutral for the 30,000 people that take our tours every year. And the standard thing would have been to buy carbon offsets here, which are helping countries in the affluent world. And I thought I could get a twofer out of it by supporting organizations, nonprofits that are in the trenches in the developing world, helping protect forests and helping struggling farmers do their work without contributing so much to climate change. Because I don't know, 20% of climate change is 25% or something is contributed by poor world farmers. Half of humanity are poor farmers in the developing world trying to live on $5 a day. So if you want to know, we did a big study and we are very enthusiastic about the 10 organizations that we are funding. In fact, even last year when we did no tours, we kept our support of these groups up at 50%. We sent $500,000 to them, even though we didn't emit any carbon last year. But the work they're doing is so exciting. If you go to ricksteves.com into the climate section, you can see our portfolio of recipients, and they are really good. They've made a nice case for themselves, and you could very easily see which one turns you on and get to know them. And they're small organizations, and we've vetted them as best as we can. And I just feel very strongly in favor of all of the 10 that are on our list. So that would be a great way to do that. And thank you, Elizabeth, for that question. I think that's very important.
That's great. Well, Rick, you've been very generous with your time, and we've gone over. So I'd just like to say, a huge thank you. It's been wonderful having you here this evening and hearing all of your insights and travel wisdom. We hope you'll join us again sometime in the future.
Lawrence, I've just enjoyed the caliber of the questions, and it's just what a wonderful group. It reminds me, I got to say, if I could mention it, to help me get through COVID for the last 6 months now, we've had a thing called Monday Night Travel. And every Monday night, it's a free gathering of 5,000 or 6,000 people join us. And I have my food and my wine, and I take people on a little trip. And it's just a lot of fun for travelers to get together. Just last night, we were doing offbeat wonders, and I was eating Georgian food. And next Monday, we're going to go to my favorite markets in Europe, and we're going to be going Italian. But it's just a party. It's fun, and it's a lot of travelers, I think, just like are watching now. So, if you're curious about that, you can go to my website, Rick Steves, and look at the Monday Night Travel tab and just join us. We'd love to have you there.
Thank you, Rick. Stay with us for a few more minutes. And thanks to our audience here in the front row and in our live stream communities. Perhaps Rick will spend a few more minutes after the class and maybe answer a couple more of your questions. If you'd like a recording of this event, please email our support team at help@getsetup.io. If you're new to GetSetUp, we hope you've gotten a taste for a little bit of what we do. We have over 300 online classes, all designed for older adults, taught by older adults. The classes are free as we work with local governments, community, and Medicare organizations who support their members with free classes. And I'm also excited to announce our travel series of classes every Monday through Saturday in April. We have a different travel theme each day, so join us for that. Look for the sign-up link for these classes in the chat here on Zoom, on our live streams, and at getsetup.org. And everyone who registered will receive an email after the event with follow-up links and notes, including links to our travel classes. So we look forward to seeing all of you in a future class. Thanks and good night, everybody.
Happy travels, even if you're just staying home for a while.